live in a world of buttons. We press them for light, for food, and post-food. It's how we interact with our computers. It's how you started this video. And it's how you play video games. Our controllers overflow with buttons, triggers, and D-pads. Even our joysticks are buttons. From gaming's humble beginnings to the latest VR motion controllers, video games are perhaps the most button-based technology around, which is unique in a world rushing to replace as many buttons as possible with touchscreens.
Everything from how you order to how you read to household appliances and even cars have been touched by the trend.
Touchscreens have wiped away the buttons on our phones, car dashboards, even our washing machines for some reason. Where buttons once ruled, touchscreens now reign supreme, except when it comes to video games, where the two methods of input cohabitate peacefully, more or less. Why is that? To really understand the touchscreen backlash, you need to understand the button. And to do that, you need to go back in time, back even before video game controllers and computer keyboards existed. Back when button technology was so new, buttons were seen as magical, something that could summon help with nothing more than the push of a finger.
French expert at your service. The word button comes from the French bouton, meaning pimple or projection, and to push or thrust forward. C'est tout. Au revoir.
Oh, thank you, Simone. But what I really could use is a button expert. Let's try that again.
Rachel Plotnick, Associate Professor of Cinema and Media Studies at Indiana University. My first book is called Power Button, A History of Pleasure, Panic, and the Politics of Pushing.
Oh, perfect! I just happened to be reading Power Button, which is a fascinating deep dive into a technology we encounter every day but hardly ever think about. It's the most 99% invisible thing I've ever read, and somehow isn't an episode of the podcast yet. Get on that, Roman Mars. The book starts in the 1880s with the advent of the push button and explores the ways this technology revolutionized daily life. Back then, it wasn't uncommon for a person to have never encountered a button before, which means you get things like Rough Riders in the big city shooting buttons with their pistols like a Yosemite Sam cartoon.
First of all, in the 1880s and into the 1900s, most people didn't have access to electricity. It wasn't very common unless you were pretty wealthy to have electricity in your home. So one of the earliest ways of marketing buttons was, I call this kind of auto magic, this idea of push a button, this amazing thing happens. And that's one of the interesting things about buttons is that they really are designed to kind of hide the infrastructures and complexities of how any given machine works behind them.
As more of the world was electrified, the ability to control electricity with a button became a bigger and bigger selling point. But advertisers weren't focused on explaining how it all worked, just the amazing result.
Whether it was vending machines or cameras, a lot of these early fields that were selling buttons portrayed them as just push the button, you'll get this magical effect. Electricity is a genie that springs forth from the button and you're just gonna get whatever it is you want.
This magical era of the button wasn't just about light switches and doorbells, but buzzers to summon waiters and maids. It was a device that allowed people to avoid interacting with others as humans, sort of like food delivery apps today. Other ads highlighted how little labor was needed to press a button. They're so easy, even a woman-child can use one. A new technology reinforcing old social hierarchies. Well, I'm sure it'll be the last time.
We kind of begin to see the emergence of what I might call like a haves and have-nots of button pushing, where people who kind of had the luxury or affordance of being able to push a button to call someone or make them do their labor were stratified from those who were kind of doing the labor.
Buttons are really good at making complex things easier to control. Things like labor, or our social lives, or even our health. And just a few decades after buttons came on the scene, there was a growing number of people who thought they made things too easy, because they allowed people to forget the actual labor involved. And they weren't just talking about the bellhop who took your bags, but the chef behind the automat, or the coal miner powering that light bulb. A magical user interface to hide distant labor exploitation. It'll probably be the last time, definitely. You can see this concern summed up nicely by educator and activist Dorothy Canfield Fisher, who in 1916 said, The fact that so often in modern America, one may press a button and be served seems to relieve one of any necessity for responsibility about what goes on behind the button. She continues, and I'm going to read the rest of this quote in the voice of Immortan Joe from Mad Max Fury Road just for fun.
There is a great danger of coming to rely so entirely on the electric button and its slaves that the wheels of initiative will be broken, or at least become rusty from long disuse.
Despite all the bad stuff buttons can enable, I don't want to banish them to the wasteland. I think the key to using buttons well is to understand the button. So let's start with the basics. Wow, it's just like magic.
The way that a button works, it's designed to open and close a circuit. So when you push it, it's completing the circuit and closing it so that electricity will flow. And then when you let go of the button, it's stopping the circuit and the electricity stops flowing.
I've got a little demonstration circuit here with a battery powering a tiny light bulb, but the circuit is only completed whenever I press the button. The way this works is that when I press the button, it is mechanically pressing down on this switch where a tiny piece of metal is connecting and completing the circuit. When I let go of the button, the circuit is no longer completed and the light goes out.
So there is very much that kind of idea of the digital, the on-off, the same way we might think of ones and zeros in computer programming or any of those kind of binary logics.
The binary logic of buttons made them perfect for manipulating everything from pinball flippers to advanced computers. Advertisements bragged about their plentiful buttons. By the 1950s, buttons were ingrained in the culture. Making someone angry might lead to an accusation of pushing their buttons. And it's never a great sign when someone's thinking about pushing the big red button.
I think I'll push this wet one.
No, not the wet one.
And the idea of buttons as almost magical devices of automation was once again in vogue. So when the first video games were being invented, buttons, in addition to switches and dials, made intuitive sense. Pretty soon, arcades were popping up across the country with chunky joysticks and big, clicky, mechanical buttons. Also around this time, computers. We were just starting to interface with digital representations of buttons. Computers were transitioning from text interfaces into graphical user interfaces, so more people could use computers. And the way they made that easier was by using icons of things people recognized, like folders, trash cans, and buttons. This shift was enabled by Douglas Englart's invention of the computer mouse, which allowed users to click a single real button that could control infinite virtual buttons. When video games became a home consumer product in the 1970s, the button stuck around, but it had to evolve for this new environment. While the iconic Atari joystick is functionally a shrunken down arcade controller, the guts underneath changed. Instead of tiny switches mechanically completing the circuit, home game controllers used membrane buttons, which rely on a thin, rubbery material that can be compressed until the circuit is completed.
And they have some advantages in the sense that they're very flat, so they don't get dirty as easily, they can't get stuff stuck under them, they don't require, a lot of force or effort to push them.
This allowed buttons to become much smaller, and though the quality was rough at first, membrane buttons were cheaper to manufacture. By the time Nintendo's first home console hit the market, the membrane button had been perfected enough to go to space. It had become the most durable choice, which was extremely important to Nintendo. Since their console was designed to be played right on the floor in front of the TV, its iconic controller needed to withstand being stepped on in the likely event it was left out. Though the D-pad had appeared elsewhere before, including Nintendo's own portable Game & Watch devices, the NES's membrane button layout became the foundation of nearly every controller that followed. The shape of game controllers became more ergonomic and gained analog sticks in the 90s, but the most consistent upgrade was more buttons. Nintendo's very next console added shoulder buttons for our index fingers and X and Y buttons on the face. Sega responded by adding even more buttons. The PlayStation's analog sticks could be clicked like a button, and both that console and the Nintendo 64 added trigger buttons to their shoulders. But in the new millennium, buttons finally faced a real competitor, something that's more advanced and adaptable than this archaic, century-old technology: the touchscreen. The touchscreen wasn't new technology. ATMs had been using touchscreens for decades, and we'd had personal digital assistants since the mid-90s.
Hey, Dolph, take a memo on your Newton. Beat up Martin. Bah!
But two devices in the aughts helped to make touchscreens truly ubiquitous. The first was the Nintendo DS, which by any definition was massively popular and eased people into the idea of interacting with a touchscreen. There were still tons of buttons, more than enough to just ignore the touchscreen if you wanted to, but it was the training wheels that helped prepare us for a groundbreaking new telephonic device, the LG Prada, which was technically the first smartphone with a glass-covered capacitive touchscreen. But a month after that was announced, Steve Jobs introduced us to the iPhone.
Well, what we're gonna do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen.
Fun fact, this move to remove buttons could be attributed to Steve Jobs' hatred of the binary on-off logic of buttons because they reminded him of his own mortality. Anyway, it didn't take long for every major smartphone manufacturer to ditch the clicky keypad for smooth glass.
And shortly after the release of the first iPhone, people were beginning to talk about this quote-unquote death of the button. And this was around 2009 when I was a graduate student, and I was really kind of fascinated about what was happening with touchscreens, and were we moving toward this buttonless future, this button-free existence.
Touchscreens absolutely have benefits. They're generally more intuitive than a mouse and can adapt to just about any type of software. Suddenly, a single button can do way more. And once we were manufacturing 1 billion touchscreen smartphones every year, the cost came down so much that building custom button panels actually became more expensive than just throwing a giant touchscreen in an electric car. It seemed for a time like manufacturers really were intent on killing the button. But what they didn't account for was a backlash.
There are growing calls to re-buttonize from frustrated consumers.
I think that touchscreens are the worst possible interface to put in a car that you still have to drive.
We send off my war rig to bring back
Buttons! Touchscreens are getting the finger for a lot of reasons, and the most serious one is how much attention they require to use. The word touchscreen is a little bit of a misnomer, because while touching it is the way you interact with it, you also must be looking at it while you touch it. Unlike physical, unchanging buttons, a touchscreen cannot be operated only by touch, which means you can't do things like send a text without looking. That's annoying enough, but it's not necessarily dangerous, unless we replaced all the buttons in our cars with giant touchscreens. Oh. This is bad, and studies prove it. Interacting with a touchscreen is way more distracting to drivers than good old tactile buttons and knobs.
Reaction times were slower than for drivers who were texting while driving or even intoxicated.
Everyone had gone all in on touchscreens and decided that everything should be a touchscreen, even our cars. I think people initially, as they saw it at my work, they thought, oh, she's a button evangelist, she loves buttons, she's out there, fighting the good fight for buttons. I'm quick to tell people, I don't think a touchscreen is good or bad. I don't think a button is good or bad. It really depends on the specific situation that you're going to be using this interface and who you are, what your body is, what context it is that you're using it.
The touchscreen backlash is all about this context. Did this device used to have buttons? Does it function better or worse with a touchscreen? The amount of research and engineering Apple has put into its Taptic 3D touch technology is evidence that even they recognize something tactile is missing from the act of touching a virtual button. And the novelty that the iPhone originally brought to touchscreens is gone, and now consumers are judging them much more holistically. And while I can attest to many such annoying touchscreens in my life, video games aren't really one of them. I have incredibly fond memories of the Nintendo DS, which proved that, with thoughtful software, you could do incredible things with a touchscreen. And obviously, playing a game means you already have your full attention on the screen, so that's not an issue, except on the Wii U. I think iPhone games suck when they try to imitate a controller for all the reasons I mentioned about tactile feedback, but it's my preferred device when playing a card-based game like Balatro. It just feels more intuitive to move the cards around that way. But overall, pro-button forces seem to be turning the tide. Some car manufacturers,
like Volkswagen and BMW,
are making it a point to bring buttons back to the dashboard. Apple removed that silly touch bar from their MacBooks and hyped the addition of more buttons on its latest iPhone. And I, personally, am so happy to have a button for turning pages on my e-reader again.
It is fascinating to me how buttons have had this tremendous staying power over time, and that all efforts to get rid of them seem like they kind of perpetually fail. You know, I started out with the death of the button in 2009. Here we are in 2025, and everyone seems to want buttons again. So I do think there's something very enduring about that technology that's pretty fascinating.
So while gamers are much more wise and thoughtful about their approach to touchscreens than most people, it's also undeniable that we love our buttons. While making this video, I've been watching people go absolutely bonkers over this mysterious button on the Switch 2, and it probably just resyncs the Joy-Cons or something. What I'm saying is, we're real button perverts. A perfect example would be the way mechanical keyboards have exploded in popularity. These clicky-clacky keyboards have a number of advantages when it comes to mushy membranes. They're more precise, more comfortable, more easily customized, can last longer, and are more easily repaired. But also, some people just find the click-clack to be a satisfying reason all on its own. And look, I think everyone gets some satisfaction from pressing a good button. Even the membrane buttons in our modern controllers have made huge strides in clickiness and tactile feedback. Plus, they've got even more of them. But if you dive deeper into just about any niche gaming community, you're likely to find real button enthusiasts. Customizing Guitar Hero controllers with mechanical buttons, and retro gaming fans arguing about which modern portables best imitate the Game Boy's D-pad. But perhaps the biggest bunch of button lovers are fighting game nerds. Here, let me show you.
Did somebody ask about fighting games? Did somebody want to know about fighting games?
Hey Pat, what the hell is this?
Oh yeah, that is the first Street Fighter cabinet, which instead of having individual buttons for light, medium, and heavy punch and kick, had two really big buttons that you just had to whack, and depending on how hard you whacked the buttons, a different attack would come out.
Wow, that sounds awful.
Yep, they broke all the time and they never did it again.
All right, but what about this?
Oh, this is my hitbox with beautiful 24mm Sanwa Denshi buttons.
No. I mean, why are there buttons instead of a joystick?
It's for the same reason those first Street Fighter cabinets were not good. There is room for ambiguity with a joystick. This joystick is technically just pushing 4 different buttons inside the controller there. There's no actual button in there for, you know, down left and up right. Those inputs are created by pushing both of those buttons at the same time, which you do by moving the stick. But with a hitbox, those buttons that are actually inside your joystick are just fully exposed right here, and you can have your fingers over them at all times, so your inputs can be faster and more precise.
Fighting games require frame-perfect precision at the highest levels of competition, and this means eliminating any ambiguity in the interface. It's the same idea behind mechanical keyboards or those custom Guitar Hero controllers. This concern with ambiguity may not be the way most people think about it, but it's also what makes touchscreens so infuriating. When you need to turn on your wipers in a rainstorm, you don't want the controls to be ambiguous. It's a new dimension to the earliest debates about buttons and the fears that they obscure what's going on behind them. And I think that's what's different about gamers' approach to buttons and touchscreens. We actually want to know what's going on behind our buttons. We're willing to customize our mechanical keyboards and learn a whole new way to play fighting games if it means feeling more closely connected with our games. And what's cool to me is that the buttons in those modern boards still pretty much function like the ones from a century ago. You press a switch and complete a circuit. It's no wonder people thought these things were magical. Press it faster than you. Like, send a text without looking. I guess you can. Skill issue. The first was the Nintendo. I'm gonna take Nintendo.
Deep breath.
Yep.
Sippy water. Rock out a little bit.
I can't say the word Nintendo.